mounting. 17 officers, looking serious and severe, many with pale faces, met together in the pavilion and drew the numbers. Vronsky drew the number 7. The cry was heard, "Mount!" Feeling that with the others riding in the race he was the centre upon which all eyes were fastened, Vronsky walked up to his mare in that state of nervous tension in which he usually became deliberate and composed in his movements. Cord, in honour of the races, had put on his best clothes, a black coat buttoned up, a stiffly starched collar which propped up his cheeks, a round black hat, and top boots. He was as calm and dignified as ever, and was with his own hands holding Fufu by both reins, and standing straight in front of her. Fufu was still trembling as though in a fever. Her eye, full of fire, glanced sideways at Vronsky. Vronsky slipped his finger under the saddle girth. The mare glanced aslant at him, drew up her lip and twitched her ear. The Englishman puckered up his lips, intending to indicate with a smile his amazement that anyone should have to verify his saddling. "Get up. You won't feel so excited." Vronsky looked around for the last time at his rivals. He knew that he wouldn't see them during the race. 2 were already riding forward to the point from which they were to start. Golitsyn, a friend of Vronsky's, and one of his more formidable rivals, was moving around a bay horse that wouldn't let him mount. A short hussar, in tight riding breeches, rode off at a gallop, crouched like a cat on the saddle, in imitation of English jockeys. Prince Kuzovlev sat with a white face on his thoroughbred mare from the Grabovsky stud, while an English groom led her by the bridle. Vronsky and all his comrades knew Kuzovlev and his peculiarity of weak nerves and terrible vanity. They knew he was afraid of everything, afraid of riding a spirited horse. But now, just because it was terrifying, because people broke their necks, and there was a doctor standing at each obstacle, and an ambulance with a cross on it, and a nurse, he had made up his mind to take part in the race. Their eyes met, and Vronsky gave him a friendly and encouraging nod. Only one he did not see, his chief rival, Machotin, on Gladiator. "Don't be in a hurry," said Cord to Vronsky. "And remember one thing. Don't hold her in at the fences, and don't urge her on. Let her go as she likes." All right," said Vronsky, taking the reins. "If you can, lead the race, but don't lose heart till the last minute, even if you're behind." Before the mare had time to move, Vronsky stepped with an agile, vigorous movement into the steel-toothed stirrup, and lightly and firmly seated himself on the creaking lever of the saddle. Getting his right foot in the stirrup, he smoothed the double reins, as he always did, between his fingers, and Cord let go. As though she didn't know which foot to put first, Frou-Frou started, dragging at the reins with her long neck, and as though she was on springs, shaking her rider from side to side. Cord quickened his step following him. The excited mare, trying to shake off her rider first on one side and then on the other, pulled at the reins, and Vronsky tried in vain with voice and hand to soothe her. They were just reaching the dammed-up stream on their way to the starting point. Several of the riders were in front, and several behind, when suddenly Vronsky heard the sound of a horse galloping in the mud behind him, and he was overtaken by Machotin on his white-legged, lop-eared Gladiator. Machotin smiled, showing his long teeth, but Vronsky looked angrily at him. He didn't like him, and regarded him now as his most formidable rival. He was angry with him for galloping past and exciting his mare. Frou-Frou started into a gallop, her left foot forward, made 2 bounds, and, bothered by the tightened reins, passed into a jolting trot, bumping her rider up and down. Cord, too, scowled, and followed Vronsky almost at a trot. Chapter 25. There were 17 officers in all riding in this race. The track was a large 3-mile elliptical ring in front of the pavilion. On this course, 9 obstacles had been arranged. The stream, a big and solid barrier 5 feet high just before the pavilion, a dry ditch, a ditch full of water, a precipitous slope, An Irish barricade, one of the most difficult obstacles, consisting of a mound fenced with brushwood, beyond which there was a ditch out of sight of the horses, so that the horse had to clear both obstacles, or might be killed. Then 2 more ditches filled with water, and 1 dry one, and the winning post faced the pavilion. But the race began not in the ring, but 200 yards away from it, and in that part of the course was the first obstacle, a dammed-up stream 7 feet in breadth, which the racers could leap or wade through, as they preferred. 3 times they were lined up and ready to start, but each time some horse thrust itself out of the line, and they had to begin again. The umpire who was starting them, Colonel Sestron, was beginning to lose his temper, when at last, for the 4th time, he shouted, "Away!" and the racers started. Every eye, every field glass was turned on the brightly coloured group of riders at the moment they were in line to start. "They're off! They're starting!" was heard on all sides after the hush of expectation. And little groups and solitary figures among the public began running from place to place to get a better view. In the very first minute, the close group of horsemen drew out, and it could be seen that they were approaching the stream in 2s and 3s, and one behind another. To the spectators, it seemed as though they had all started simultaneously, but to the racers, there were seconds of difference that had great value to them. Frou-Frou, excited and over-nervous, lost in the first moment, and several horses had started before her. But before reaching the stream, Vronsky, who was holding in the mare with all his force as she tugged at the bridle, easily overtook 3, and left in front of him were Machotin's chestnut Gladiator, whose hindquarters were moving lightly and rhythmically up and down exactly in front of Vronsky, and in the lead, the exquisite mare Diana, bearing Kuzovlev, more dead than alive. For the first instant, Vronsky was master of neither himself nor his mare. Up to the first obstacle, the stream, he couldn't guide the motions of his mare. Gladiator and Diana came up to it together, and almost at the same instant, simultaneously, up they rose above the stream, and flew across to the other side. Frou-Frou darted after them as if flying. But at the very moment when Vronsky felt himself in the air, he suddenly saw, almost under his mare's hoofs, Kuzovlev, who was floundering with Diana on the farther side of the stream. Kuzovlev had let go the reins as he took the leap, and the mare had sent him flying over her head. Those details Vronsky learned later. At the moment, all he saw was that just under him, where Frou-Frou must alight, Diana's legs or head might be in the way. But Frou-Frou drew her legs up and back in the very act of leaping, like a falling cat, and clearing the other mare, alighted beyond her. "Oh, the darling," thought Vronsky. After crossing the stream, Vronsky had complete control of his mare, and began holding her in, intending to cross the great barrier behind Machotin, and to try to overtake him in the clear ground of about 500 yards that followed it. The great barrier stood just in front of the imperial pavilion. The Tsar and the whole court and crowds of people were all gazing at them, at him and at Machotin a length ahead of him as they drew near the Devil, as the solid barrier was called. Vronsky was aware of those eyes fastened upon him from all sides, but he saw nothing except the ears and neck of his own mare, the ground racing to meet him, and the black and white legs of Gladiator beating time swiftly before him, and keeping always the same distance ahead. Gladiator rose, and without touching anything. With a wave of his short tail, he disappeared from Vronsky's sight. "Bravo!" cried a voice. At the same instant, under Vronsky's eyes, right before him, flashed the palings of the barrier. Without the slightest change in her action, his mare flew over it, the palings vanished, and he heard only a crash behind him. The mare, excited by Gladiator's keeping ahead, had risen too soon before the barrier and grazed it with her hind hoofs. But her pace never changed, and Vronsky, feeling a spatter of mud in his face, realized that he was once more the same distance from Gladiator. Once more he perceived in front of him the same back and short tail, and again the same swiftly moving white legs that got no further away. At the very moment Vronsky thought that now was the time to overtake Machotin, Frou-Frou herself, understanding his thoughts without any urging on his part, gained considerable ground and drew up alongside Mahotin on the best side, close to the inner rope. Mahotin wouldn't let her pass on that side. Vronsky had hardly formed the thought that he could perhaps pass on the outer side when Frou-Frou shifted her pace and began overtaking him on the other side. Frou-Frou's shoulder, beginning by now to be dark with sweat, was even with Gladiator's back. For a few lengths they moved evenly. But before the obstacle they were approaching, Vronsky began working at the reins, anxious to avoid having to take the outer circle and swiftly pass Mahotin just on the hillside. He caught a glimpse of his mud-spattered face as he flashed by. He even thought that he smiled. Vronsky passed Mahotin, but he was immediately aware of him, close upon him, and he never ceased hearing the even gallop and the rapid and still quite fresh breathing of Gladiator. The next two obstacles, the watercourse and the barrier, were easily crossed, but Vronsky began to hear the snorting and thud of Gladiator closer to him. He urged on his mare, and to his delight felt that she easily quickened her pace, and the thud of Gladiator's hoofs was again heard at the same distance away. Vronsky was in the lead, just as he wanted to be, and as Cord had advised, and now he felt sure of being the winner. His excitement, his delight, and his tenderness for Frou-Frou grew keener and keener. He longed to look around again, but he didn't dare to do this, and tried to be cool and not to urge on his mare, so to keep the same reserve of force in her as he felt that Gladiator still kept. There remained only one obstacle, the most difficult. If he could cross it ahead of the others, he would come in first. He was flying towards the Irish barricade. Frou-Frou and he both saw the barricade in the distance, and both the man and the mare had a moment's hesitation. He saw the uncertainty in the mare's ears and lifted the whip, but at the same time felt that his fears were groundless. The mare knew what was wanted. She quickened her pace and rose smoothly, just as he had thought that she would, and as she left the ground, she gave herself up to the force of her rush, which carried her far beyond the ditch, and with the same rhythm, without effort, with the same leg forward, Frou-Frou fell back into her pace again. "Bravo, Vronsky!" He heard shouts from a knot of men. He knew they were his friends in the regiment, who were standing at the obstacle. He couldn't fail to recognize Yashvin's voice, though he didn't see him. "Oh, my sweet," he said inwardly to Frou-Frou, as he listened for what was happening behind. He's cleared it, he thought, catching the thud of Gladiator's hoofs behind him. There remained only the last ditch, filled with water and 5 feet wide. Vronsky didn't even look at it, but anxious to win by a long way, first began working away at the reins, lifting the mare's head and letting it go in time with her paces. He felt that the mare was at her very last reserve of strength. Not merely her neck and shoulders were wet, but the sweat was standing in drops on her mane, her head, her sharp ears, and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. But he knew that she had more than enough strength left for the remaining 500 yards. It was only from feeling himself nearer the ground and from the peculiar smoothness of his motion that Vronsky knew how greatly the mare had quickened her pace. She flew over the ditch as though not noticing it. She flew over it like a bird. But at the same instant, Vronsky, to his horror, felt that he had failed to keep up with the mare's pace, that he didn't know how, made a fearful, unpardonable mistake in recovering his seat in the saddle. All at once his position had shifted, and he knew something awful had happened. He couldn't yet make out what had happened, when the white legs of a chestnut horse flashed by close to him, and Mahotin passed at a swift gallop. Vronsky was touching the ground with one foot, and his mare was sinking on that foot. He just had time to free his leg when she fell on one side, gasping painfully, and making vain efforts to rise with her delicate soaking neck. She fluttered on the ground at his feet like a shot bird. The clumsy movement made by Vronsky had broken her back, but that he found out only much later. At that moment, he knew only that Mahotin had flown swiftly by, while he stood staggering alone on the muddy, motionless ground. And Frou-Frou lay gasping before him, bending her head back and gazing at him with her exquisite eyes. Still unable to realize what had happened, Vronsky tugged at his mare's reins. Again she struggled all over like a fish, and her shoulders setting the saddle heaving, she rose on her front legs, but unable to lift her back, she quivered all over and again fell on her side. With a face hideous with passion, his lower jaw trembling and his cheeks white, Vronsky kicked her with his heel in the stomach, and again began tugging at the rein. She didn't stir, but thrusting her nose into the ground, she simply gazed at her master with her speaking eyes. "Oh," groaned Vronsky, clutching at his head. "Oh, what have I done?" he cried. "The race lost, and my fault. Shameful, unpardonable. And the poor